He already found someone. He said I have to go with them at noon. Please, please don't let him take me. She was 10 years old, barefoot and bleeding, and she was saying these words into the face of the most terrifying-looking man she had ever seen in her life, and she was not running from him. She was grabbing his jacket with both fists, and she would not let him go. 6 Hell's Angels, a deserted road, a child who had been running since before sunrise, and a stepfather emerging from the trees behind her, furious that his property had escaped. What these bikers did next stunned an entire nation. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city below. I want to see how far Lily's story travels. If you've ever believed that heroes come in unexpected forms, this story will prove you right. Subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The 6 of them had been riding since before dawn. Bear always led the pack. That was just how it had been for 11 years, ever since the chapter voted him in, and nobody ever thought to vote him out. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. 6'3", built like a wall that had survived a few too many storms, with a gray-streaked beard that his late mother used to say made him look like a grizzly that forgot to hibernate. He didn't talk much. But when he did, every man in that group went quiet and listened. Behind him rode Ruckus, 29 years old, all nervous energy, and quick hands, the youngest member of the group by nearly a decade. Then there was Diesel, who got his name from the way he laughed, loud, oily, and impossible to ignore. Patch was next, a Vietnam vet who'd seen enough darkness in his life that he'd stopped flinching at most things. Then came T-Bone and Shepard, 2 men who'd known each other since high school and hadn't spent more than 2 weeks apart in 30 years. They were riding Willow Highway because it was quiet, because nobody drove it anymore since the new interstate went up. Because on a Saturday morning in early October, 6 men who spent most of their lives being stared at, avoided, and whispered about deserved 2 hours of peace. That was what Bear told himself when they left the clubhouse at 5:30 in the morning. He was wrong about the peace part. It started with Diesel's hand shooting up. Bear saw it in his mirror, Diesel's arm raised straight, the signal that every rider in the pack knew meant, "Stop now, something's wrong." Bear didn't hesitate. He squeezed the brake and felt the bike shudder beneath him, gravel crunching under the tires as they all pulled to the shoulder. "What?" Bear called back, already swinging off his bike. Diesel wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the tree line. "I heard something," Diesel said. His voice was different from usual. Quieter. "From in there." Ruckus pulled off his helmet. "Probably a deer." "Deer don't cry," Patch said. And then they all heard it. It wasn't loud at first. It was the kind of sound that the wind almost swallowed thin, high, ragged. The sound of someone trying to breathe and scream at the same time. The sound of a human being in genuine, desperate terror. Bear was already moving toward the tree line. "Bear," Shepard started. "Stay with the bikes," Bear said. He didn't look back. She came out of the woods like something the forest was trying to spit out, crashing through the underbrush branches, whipping against her arms and face, both feet bare on the gravel shoulder. She was small, fragile, maybe 10 years old, though the wildness in her eyes made her look both younger and older. At the same time, younger because of the pure animal fear, older because of the weight behind it. Her dark hair was tangled with leaves. The left sleeve of her shirt was torn clean at the shoulder. There were scratches on her arms that weren't from branches. She saw the bikers and she froze. 6 enormous men, all leather and chrome and hard faces, standing in a line on the side of the road. Oh, any other child would have turned and bolted back into the trees. This child looked at them for exactly 3 seconds. Then she ran straight at Bear. "Please," she gasped, grabbing fistfuls of his jacket. "Please don't let him take me back. Please, he's going to sell me. He told me, he said he already found someone. Please." Bear caught her by the shoulders, gently. The way you'd steady something you were terrified of breaking. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, his big hands barely touching her like she was made of glass. "Hey," he said. "Hey, look at me, right here, look at my face." She looked. "Nobody," Bear said quietly, "is taking you anywhere. You understand me, nobody." He felt her shaking through his palms, like a current running through her whole body. He'd held frightened animals before. He'd never held a frightened child. It was different in a way he didn't have words for. "What's your name?" he said. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily." He nodded once. My name is Bear, and these ugly men behind me, they're my friends. And right now, this road, it belongs to us, which means you're safe on it. Okay, she searched his face for a lie. He let her look. Okay, she finally said, but she didn't let go of his jacket. Ta-da! Ruckus stepped forward. He was trying to look casual the way people do when they're anything but. She said sell. You heard that right, he said under his breath to Diesel. Diesel's jaw was set. I heard it. Like, Ruckus lowered his voice even further. Like what she said she meant. Don't ask questions like that out loud, Patch said quietly, stepping between the two of them. His voice was flat and final. Not in front of her. Shepard had moved without anyone noticing. He was already on the phone, stepped 10 feet up the road, his back to the group. T-Bone stood closest to the tree line, watching the woods with the practiced stillness of a man who'd learned long ago that threats rarely announced themselves before they arrived. Bear kept his attention on Lily. Where are your shoes? He asked. I left them, she said. I was running. I didn't want to slow down. How long were you running? She thought about it. Since before it got light. Bear looked at the sky. It was past 9 in the morning now. He felt something cold settle in his chest. He didn't let it show on his face. Okay, and the person you're running from, where were you when you started? The cabin, she said. Off Miller Road. The old one, it doesn't have a real address. She swallowed hard. He said he didn't want it to have a real address. The cold thing in Bear's chest got colder. Your mom, he said carefully. She died. No hesitation, no tears, just the flat, terrible certainty of a child who had already done all her crying about that particular fact. In February, a car accident. A pause. That's when everything got bad. Bear nodded. He looked at the ground for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back up at her. Who's the person chasing you, Lily? What's his name? Rick, she said. He's my stepfather. Her hands tightened on his jacket. He lost his job. He owes money to people, a lot of money, and he said, she stopped. Her throat worked. He said I was the only thing he had left to pay them with. Behind Bear, Ruckus made a sound that was barely controlled fury converted into a sharp exhale. Diesel turned away. When he turned back, his expression was the most controlled thing on his face, which meant the rest of him was barely holding together. T-Bone said from the tree line, Bear. One word. That was enough. Bear rose slowly to his full height. He didn't move Lily, she was still holding on to him, so he just shifted, putting his body between her and whatever T-Bone had seen. Company, Bear said without turning his head. Not yet, T-Bone said, but fresh tracks, boots, coming out of the trees about 40 yards north. Recent, real recent. Shepard came back from his phone call. He looked at Bear. Bear looked at him. 20 minutes, Shepard said quietly. That was all, just 2 words. Bear understood he'd called for backup or called someone. 20 minutes for what exactly wasn't something they could discuss in front of the girl. All right, Bear said. He looked down at Lily. She was watching him the way a person watches the only solid thing in a flooding room. Lily, I need you to stay right next to me, and I need you to not let go of my jacket. Can you do that? Yes, she said. If I tell you to get behind the bikes, you go fast. You go low. You don't look up until I say. She nodded. She was scared, but she was listening. That kind of listening was the kind that came from a child who had learned, probably out of terrible necessity, that the instructions given by adults in serious voices were worth following. Ruckus, Bear said, yeah. North side. Ruckus moved quiet as a man his age had no right to be toward the tree line at T-Bone's position. Diesel, Shepard, either side of the road. They spread out without a word. Patch moved to stand just behind Bear's left shoulder. The old man never needed to be told where to position himself. He just always knew. The road was silent. The birds had stopped. Later, Diesel would say the silence was the worst part, that particular kind of silence, where nature itself holds its breath because something wrong is moving through it. It lasted maybe 45 seconds. It felt like 45 minutes. Then the underbrush north of T-Bone's position erupted. Not with running feet, with a voice. Lily. The name came out of the trees like a weapon. Loud, commanding, furious. The voice of a man who was used to being obeyed and was currently being refused. Lily grabbed Bear's jacket with both fists and pressed herself against his back. The man who came out of the trees was not what any of them expected, and bikers as a rule are not people who are easily surprised by what walks out of shadows. Rick was not a monster in shape. He was medium height, thin, but corded with lean muscle, wearing a canvas jacket over a flannel shirt work boots. He had a face that might have been ordinary, once the kind you'd see at a diner counter and forget immediately. But something had crippled behind his eyes, the look of a man who'd crossed a line inside himself and been surprised to find the crossing so easy. He stopped when he saw them. 6 bikers spread across a 2-lane road between him and the girl. He stared. Then, and this was the thing that told Bear everything he needed to know about Rick, instead of stopping, instead of calculating, instead of doing what any sensible man would do when confronted with that particular wall of leather and consequence, Rick straightened up. "That's my daughter," he said. "She's coming with me." Nobody moved. "I don't want to cause any trouble with you, gentlemen," Rick continued. His voice had shifted. The fury was still underneath it, but he'd put a layer of careful over the top, the practiced calm of someone who'd used words to navigate around consequences before. "She ran off. She does that. She gets confused and scared, and she makes up stories. You know how kids are." He spread his hands, open, reasonable. "I just want to take her home." Bear looked at him for a long moment. "What's her middle name?" he said. Rick blinked. "What?" "Her middle name," Bear said, slower, like he was explaining something to someone who was having trouble keeping up. "If she's your daughter, you know her middle name." Something shifted in Rick's face. A recalculation. "Rose," he said. "Lily Rose." Lily's face was pressed against Bear's back. She said nothing. Bear said nothing either. But his hand had moved slowly, deliberately to rest on Lily's shoulder. "She told us some things," Bear said, with some while we were waiting. "Whatever she told you was detailed," Bear continued. "Specific. The cabin off Miller Road, the debt you owe, the people you owe it to." He paused. "The arrangement you made." The reasonable look on Rick's face didn't disappear. It cracked. Just at the edges, just enough for what was underneath to show through, and what was underneath was ugly and cold and not sorry about a single thing. "You don't understand the situation I'm in," Rick said. "No," Bear agreed. "I don't, and I don't need to." She's mine." Rick's voice dropped. The reasonable layer was gone. "Legally, I'm her father of record. You people have no right to." "Step 1 foot closer to this child," Ruckus said from the north side, and his voice had a quality to it that nobody who knew him casually would have recognized, flat and cold and entirely without youth. "And I promise you the situation you're in right now will seem like a fond memory." Rick looked at Ruckus, then back at Bear, then at Diesel and Shepherd on either side of the road, then at Patch, who hadn't moved but whose stillness was the particular variety that people who'd served in combat carry with them, like a second shadow. Rick made a decision. "Fine," he said, quietly, pleasantly. "Fine, I'll go get help. I'll call the sheriff. We'll sort this out the proper way." He took 2 steps back toward the tree line. "Shepherd," Bear said, "already on it." Shepherd said, phone in hand. Rick disappeared into the trees. For 10 seconds, the road was still. Then Lily slowly peeled her face away from Bear's jacket. She looked up at him. "He's not going to call the sheriff," she said. "No." Bear agreed. "He's not. He's going to get his truck." Her voice was steady in a way that should have been impossible for a 10-year-old in that situation, and that steadiness was somehow the most heartbreaking thing Bear had heard all day. "He parks it on the service road behind Miller Road. He knows these woods." She looked at the tree line. "He's faster in them than he looks." Bear turned to his men. "Bikes," he said, one word. They moved. The ritual of men who'd ridden together for years, no wasted motion, no overlapping instructions, no hesitation. Engines firing, the sound of it filling that hollow, quiet road. Bear lifted Lily and set her in front of him with a care that was so at odds with the urgency of the moment that Ruckus had to look away. "Hold the tank," Bear told her. "Don't let go." "I won't," she said. He believed her. They pulled out onto Willow Highway, heading south, 6 bikes tight and purposeful, and Bear was running a calculation in his head. Miller Road was roughly 3 miles north. The service road behind it would connect back to the highway about a mile and a half below their current position if someone drove fast through the back route, which meant Rick, if Lily was right about the truck, had less time than he thought and more speed than any of them wanted. T-Bone, Bear said into the comm. Take the lead. Eyes up. Copy, T-Bone said and surged forward. Lily's hands were locked around the tank. Her back was pressed flat against Bear's chest. He could feel her breathing, short, controlled, deliberate, the breath of someone who had learned to manage fear by managing oxygen. He didn't know what that child had been through in the months since February. He didn't want to think about it. Not yet. But he was going to think about it later. And so was Rick. T-Bone's voice crackled over the comm. Bear, Service Road Junction, 200 yards. And there it was. A truck, old dark green, one headlight, slightly off-center, was already at the junction, half pulled onto the highway, engine roaring. Rick had been even faster than Lily predicted. The truck was sideways across the lane, not fully blocking it, but close enough to make passing a calculation with narrow margins. Lily felt Bear's body shift. She'd been riding behind adults her whole life, and she could read a rider's intent through muscle and lean in breath. He was deciding something. Hold tight, Bear said, and as tight as you can. I know, she said, and she did. The truck lurched forward. Bear went left, hard. Ruckus went right. The six of them split like a flock of birds around a stone. Two left, two right, T-Bone and Patch straight, threading the gap with centimeters to spare, and Rick's truck caught between two directions at once, overcorrected right, the tires screaming against the asphalt, and Bear was already 40 yards past before he heard the sound he'd been half expecting. The crash wasn't catastrophic. It was the sound of a truck losing the argument with a drainage ditch, metal and earth, and the brutal percussion of something designed to go forward being forced sideways. Then silence. Then the calm, we clear. That was Diesel. We clear, T-Bone confirmed. He's in the ditch. Truck's not moving. Bear didn't stop. He didn't look back. Lily was fine, still locked on the tank, breathing hard but steady. Adhi, she started. He's in a ditch, Bear said. Not hurt, but not going anywhere. She was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. Good, she said. And Bear found for the first time since this morning began that he had something close to a smile on his face. The county sheriff's station was 11 miles south on Route 7. It was not a large building. It was not an impressive building. But when 6 Hells Angels motorcycles rolled into the parking lot with a small barefoot girl sitting in front of the lead rider, the deputy at the front desk stood up so fast she knocked her coffee off the counter. Bear helped Lily down from the bike. She stood on the pavement and looked at the station, and then she looked back at him. They're going to ask me a lot of questions, she said. It wasn't fear in her voice, just fatigue. The bone-deep fatigue of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Yeah, Bear said. They are. Will you stay, she said, and then quickly, as though she'd caught herself asking too much, you don't have to. Bear looked at her. Then he looked at his men. Ruckus, Diesel, Patch, T-Bone, Shepherd, all of them watching him. Ruckus, Bear said. Yeah, boss. Call the lawyer. Ruckus was already reaching for his phone. Bear looked back at Lily. We're staying, he said. She didn't say anything, but she reached out and took 2 fingers of his hand, just 2, the way small children hold on to adults when they want connection, but are still afraid to ask for too much, and she didn't let go. They walked into the station together. The deputy's name was Sandra Okafor, and she had been working the front desk at Millhaven County Sheriff's Station for 9 years. She had seen things walk through that door that would make most people's hair go white. She thought after 9 years she was past the point of being surprised. Then 6 Hells Angels got in with a barefoot 10-year-old girl holding 2 fingers of the biggest one's hand, and Sandra Okafor revised that assumption immediately. She came around the counter before she'd consciously decided to move. That was instinct, the kind that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to the body. She crouched in front of Lily and her voice dropped into the register she used with her own nieces and nephews, the one that was soft without being condescending. Hi, honey. My name's Sandra. Are you hurt? Lily considered the question with a seriousness that most adults don't bring to anything. My feet, she said, and my arms. But not bad. Okay. Can I look? Lily glanced up at Bear. He gave her a small nod. She looked back at Sandra and said yes. Sandra looked at the scratches on her arms, the torn shirt, the condition of her bare feet after running on gravel and forest floor since before dawn. She kept her face very still. Inside, she was not still at all. She stood and looked at Bear. "Who are you to her?" "Nobody," Bear said. "We found her on Willow Highway about 40 minutes ago. She came out of the woods." "She was running from her stepfather," Ruckus said from behind him. His voice had that edge to it, still the cold one that had appeared at the road and hadn't fully left. "Guy named Rick. She told us he was planning to—" He stopped, looked at Lily, recalculated. "She can tell you what she told us." Sandra straightened. She looked at the six of them, really looked the way law enforcement looks at people cataloging and assessing, and then she made a decision. "Okay, I need one of you to wait outside with the others, and one of you can come in with her if she wants. Her choice." She looked at Lily. "Honey, do you want one of them to come sit with you while we talk?" Lily didn't hesitate. "Bear," she said. Sandra nodded. She looked at Bear. He looked back at her with an expression that was impossible to read and completely calm, the way very large men sometimes are when they're working hard to make themselves as unthreatening as possible in a small space. "Come on then," Sandra said. The others waited outside. Ruckus paced. That was how he processed things: movement, constant and directionless, burning off what couldn't be spoken. Diesel sat on the front step with his elbows on his knees and stared at the parking lot. Patch stood with his arms crossed and his eyes closed, and anybody who didn't know him would have thought he was asleep. T-Bone was on the phone, quiet, clipped, efficient. Shepard watched the road. After 4 minutes of silence, Diesel said, "How does a man do that?" Nobody answered. It wasn't a question that had an answer. It was the kind of thing you say when the thing you're really feeling is too big and too ugly to name directly. Ruckus stopped pacing. "He looked at us like we were the problem," he said. "On the road. He came out of those trees and looked right at us like we had something that belonged to him and he was being inconvenienced." He shook his head, like she was a thing, property. "Stop," Patch said. His eyes were still closed. "I can't stop," Ruckus said. "You can," Patch said, "because right now that little girl is inside telling a stranger the worst thing that's happened to her, and she's doing it without falling apart. So you can hold yourself together for 10 minutes. Ruckus went quiet. He sat down on the curb. The 5 of them waited. Inside, in a small room with a table and 4 chairs and a box of tissues that Sandra had quietly placed within Lily's reach, Lily talked. She talked the way people talk when they've been holding something enormous for a long time. And someone has finally opened the door, not in a flood, but in careful, measured pieces, like she was handing over something fragile and needed to be sure each piece was received before she let go of the next one. She talked about her mother, how her name was Christine and she had dark hair like Lily's, and she worked 2 jobs after Rick lost his, and she never once complained about it, not to Lily anyway. How the car accident happened on a Tuesday night in February coming home from her second shift. Black ice on Route 12, a telephone pole. How Lily had been asleep when the police knocked on the door and Rick had answered it, and she'd heard his voice change in a way she'd never heard a voice change before. Not grief exactly, but something collapsing behind it. How things changed after that. Slowly at first, then faster. Rick started drinking in a way that was different from before, less social and more like drowning. The men who came to the house changed less like neighbors, more like something else. Lily had learned to read rooms the way animals read weather, and the rooms of their house began to feel with increasing frequency like the sky before lightning. She talked about the night 3 weeks ago when she'd heard Rick on the phone in the kitchen, and she'd been on the stairs and he hadn't known she was there. She didn't repeat the exact words he'd said into that phone. She just said, "I understood what he was talking about. I'm 10, not stupid." Sandra wrote everything down. She kept her face neutral. She asked quiet, careful questions. Bear sat to Lily's left and slightly behind her, which was where Lily had positioned him close enough to be present far enough to give her space. He didn't interject. He didn't react visibly. But once when Lily described the morning waking at 4 in the dark, hearing the truck pulling in outside, understanding that today was the day Rick had chosen, once at that point, Bear's right hand tightened on his knee. Sandra noticed. She didn't mention it. "You said he was bringing someone," Sandra said, "this morning, when you ran." "He was on the phone when I woke up," Lily said. "I heard him say the address. Miller rode the old Hensley cabin off the fire access road. He said he told them to come at noon. She looked at the table. It was 4 in the morning. I had 8 hours. So you ran, Sandra said. I've been planning it, Lily said, for 3 weeks since I heard him on the phone. I knew the woods. My mom used to take me walking out there. I knew which direction the highway was. She paused. I didn't know about the bikers. That part was just luck. She said it plainly. Just luck. Like the most extraordinary rescue of her life was a variable she'd had no way to account for. Bear made a sound barely audible, at something between a breath and a word, and then stopped. Lily glanced at him. Are you okay? Yeah, Bear said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Yeah, I'm good. Sandra stepped out briefly to speak to another deputy. Her name tag said Reeves Young, maybe 25, with the look of someone who had been sent to get a superior officer and was trying to decide if this constituted that level of situation. It constituted that level of situation. Sandra came back in. She looked at Bear first, then at Lily. Honey, I need to make a few calls. A woman named Carol is going to come in and sit with you. She works with children in situations like this, and she's very kind. Is that okay? Lily looked at Bear. The look asked a question. I'm not going anywhere, Bear said. I'll be right outside that door. You promise, she said. The word landed differently than it should have, not childishly, not dramatically, but with the weight of someone who had learned recently and painfully that promises were things people broke. Bear held her gaze. I promise, he said. She nodded. He stood. He walked to the door. Before he stepped, he heard her say very quietly to no one in particular, he reminds me of my grandfather. Bear stopped with his hand on the door frame. He stood there for 1 second, then he stepped through. In the hallway, Sandra pulled him 6 steps away from the door and dropped her voice to barely above a whisper. Miller Road, the Hensley cabin. You said the stepfather Rick went into a ditch on Willow. About a mile north of the Service Road junction, Bear said. He's not going anywhere. We've got a unit heading there now. She paused. She said noon. Whoever he called, whoever was supposed to come. I know, Bear said. It's 10:47. Bear looked at her, which means Sandra said that if Rick managed to call anyone between the ditch and now, they might already be on their way. And if they get to that cabin and find it empty, they come looking, Bear finished. Or they run, Sandra said, and we lose them. Bear was quiet for a moment. What do you need? I need to know if you or any of your people touched Rick during the confrontation on the road. One of my men pushed him when Rick moved toward the girl. Did Rick fall? He stumbled back. No contact with the ground. He left on his own 2 feet. Sandra exhaled. Okay, that helps. She looked at him with the direct measuring look of someone deciding how much to say. Those men out front, are they going to be a problem for me? No, Bear said. The minute Rick's lawyer, if he has one, the minute anyone starts arguing custodial rights. He doesn't have rights, Bear said. It came out flat and final. Whatever paperwork says he does, he gave those up. You know that. Legally, I need more than what we have right now. I need corroboration. I need that cabin, and I need whatever's on his phone. Then go get it, Bear said. Sandra almost smiled. Almost. I'll need statements from all of you. Fine. It might take a while. We have time, Bear said. We're not going anywhere either. He went back outside. The 5 of them looked up at him immediately. She okay? Ruckus asked. She's okay, Bear said. She's stronger than most people I know. He looked at all of them. They need statements from everyone, and we're staying until this is done. Nobody argued. Nobody even hesitated. Rick, Diesel asked. They've got a unit going to him, and they're moving on the cabin. The cabin. Patch said the word the way you'd say a diagnosis. The weight of it just sitting there. They've got a time, Bear said. Noon. They've got 43 minutes. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. That one had been waiting. This one was something sharper, the silence of men who understood the stakes had just doubled, and there was nothing they could do about it but wait. T-Bone spoke quietly. We need to not be the thing that complicates this, he said. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular, just the parking lot. We need to be the thing that helps it hold together. That's exactly right, Bear said. At 11:22, Sandra came out to the parking lot. She had the look of someone who had just had a phone call that confirmed something she'd hoped wasn't true and feared was inevitable. The bikers all stood. The cabin's empty, she said. Bear felt something drop through him. Rick's truck is still in the ditch, she continued. He's not in it. He wasn't there when the unit arrived. He's gone. She paused. On foot, probably. Through the woods. He knows them, like the girl said. And the people he called, Shepard asked. No vehicle at the cabin, but Sandra stopped. She was choosing her next words carefully. There was evidence at the cabin, enough, more than enough. She paused again. I can't detail that for you, but I can tell you that this is no longer just a county matter. I've made calls. She looked at Bear. Lily is not going back to that man. Not ever, that I can tell you. Bear let out a slow breath. But Rick is in the wind, Ruckus said. For now. How far does he get on foot through the woods? Farther than you'd think if he's motivated, Sandra said. She looked at her watch. We've got roadblocks going up on the North County roads. State's sending a dog unit. She looked back up at the group. But I need you all to understand something. If any of you encounter this man again outside of a law enforcement context, we call you, Bear said. Sandra looked at him for a long moment. That's what I was going to say. Then we're on the same page, Bear said. They gave their statements one at a time in a small office off the main room to a sheriff's deputy named Collins, who wrote everything down in longhand and asked each of them separately the same series of questions in the same order and received from each of them separately, in their own words, the same essential account, because it was the truth, and the truth is the thing that holds its shape when you press on it from different angles. Ruckus went first, then Diesel, then T-Bone and Shepard together, which Collins initially resisted and then allowed when it became clear that the two of them would tell the same story anyway, and doing it separately would just take longer. Patch went next, and when Patch spoke, Collins stopped writing twice, not because he'd missed anything, but because a man who speaks with absolute economy and zero emotion describing a scene is sometimes more arresting than a man who shouts. Bear went last. His statement took the longest. Not because Collins asked him more questions, but because Bear was the one who'd been closest, who'd crouched in the road with a 10-year-old girl gripping his jacket, who'd held her on the bike, who'd made her a promise outside an interview room door. Collins asked at the end, when she came out of the woods and approached you, were you afraid of her? Bear looked at him. No. Were you afraid for her? A pause. From the second I heard her, yeah. From the second I heard what was in her voice. And when the stepfather came out of the trees when he made his argument, were you afraid then? Bear thought about it. He gave the question the honesty it deserved. No, he said. I was angry. That's different. Collins nodded. He closed his notebook. He looked at Bear with the particular expression of a man who has been doing a job long enough to have strong opinions and enough professional restraint not to voice most of them. For what it's worth, he said, she's lucky it was your stretch of road. Bear said nothing. He nodded once. He stood and walked out. True. At 12:41, Carol, the child services worker, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses, pushed up on her head in a no-nonsense manner that Lily had apparently warmed to, almost immediately came out to the waiting area and found Bear. She's asking for you, Carol said. She studied him with the practiced eye of someone who worked every day with the question of who was safe and who wasn't. She wants to know if you're still here. Tell her yes, Bear said. You could tell her yourself, Carol said. He looked at her. She needs to see it, Carol said. Not unkindly, just directly. Right now, a lot of what she believes about whether she's safe is tied to whether you're still in that building. You can tell me you'll stay, but she needs to hear it from you. Bear followed Carol back into the room. Lily was sitting at the table with a cup of juice and a granola bar that she hadn't touched. When Bear came through the door, something in her whole body changed. The set of her shoulders shifted, the line of her jaw unclenched, and she let out a breath that she might have been holding for 20 minutes. You're still here, she said. Told you, he said. He sat across from her. How are you doing? Tired, she said. Then, they said Rick got away. He didn't insult her by pretending she hadn't heard correctly. Yeah, he said. For now. For now, she repeated. She turned the juice cup in her hands. He knows Woods really well. My mom used to say he was like a... She stopped. She started again. She used to say a lot of things about him that turned out not to be true. Bear let that sit without trying to fix it. Can I ask you something? Lily said. Yeah. Why did you stop? She looked at him directly. On the road. You could have just kept going. Bear looked at her. He thought about giving her the reasonable answer, the human answer, the one about instinct and decency, and how any person would have done the same. He thought about it and decided she deserved better than the easy version. I heard something in your voice, he said, when you were still in the trees, before I even saw you. And whatever it was, I knew I couldn't ride away from it. Lily was quiet. Some things Bear said, you can't unknow once you hear them. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've just understood something that needed to be said plainly. He's not going to find me here, is he? She said. No, Bear said. He's not. And Carol says I'm going to stay with someone she knows tonight. She glanced at the door. She says it's safe. Do you believe her? Lily considered. I think so. A pause. I believe you. Then for now, Bear said, let that be enough. She looked down at the granola bar. She picked it up. She took a bite. It was, Bear would think later, the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing he saw that entire day. A child eating a granola bar because someone had told her she was safe enough to be hungry again. He sat with her until Carol came back. He did not check his phone. He did not look at his watch. He just sat there in a plastic chair in a county sheriff's station, while outside his 5 brothers waited on the blacktop without complaint. And somewhere in the woods north of Miller Road, a man who had forfeited every claim to human decency was running, and the bars were coming. Bear sat there, and he waited, and the girl ate her granola bar. And then at 1:14 in the afternoon, Sandra's radio went off. She listened for 4 seconds. Her expression didn't change. She looked up and found Bear's eyes across the room, and she nodded. Sandra's nod was small, controlled, the kind of nod that carries an enormous amount of weight in a very compressed gesture. Bear read it the way he read most things, not by overthinking it, but by feel. He stood slowly so as not to startle Lily and crossed the room to where Sandra stood near the door. They got him, Sandra said, quietly, close enough that only Bear could hear. Bear exhaled through his nose, one long, slow breath out. Where Old Fire Road behind the Cressman property, about 2 miles northeast of where his truck went into the ditch. State dog unit tracked him. He made it farther than expected, but he'd stopped moving. Deputy says he was just sitting on a log when they found him. She paused. Sitting on a log, like he was waiting for a bus. Like he gave up, Bear said. Or like he was waiting for something, Sandra said. And the way she said it, careful, measured, not dismissive, told Bear she wasn't entirely sure which one it was. He turned that over. A man who runs hard through 2 miles of woods and then just stops and sits. That could be exhaustion. That could be defeat. Or it could be something else entirely. A man who had already made another call, already set something else in motion, and was simply waiting for the outcome. His phone, Bear said. We're working on it, Sandra said. He had it on him. It's locked. She looked at Bear steadily. We're working on it, she repeated, with emphasis. Bear nodded. He went back to the table. He sat back down across from Lily, and he looked at her face, and he made a decision about what she needed to know right now and what could wait. They found Rick, he said. Lily went very still. He's in custody, Bear said. He's not going anywhere. She stared at him. He watched her process it, the information moving through her the way water moves through cracked ground, filling spaces she hadn't known were empty. Then her face did something complicated. It wasn't relief exactly. It wasn't joy. It was more like the particular expression of someone who has been holding a door shut against something enormous for a very long time and has just been told they can let go, but their hands don't quite believe it yet. Okay, she said, barely a whisper. Okay, Bear said back. Carol appeared in the doorway. She looked at Bear. He gave her a small nod. She came in and sat beside Lily and didn't say anything, just put her hand on the table close enough that Lily could reach it if she wanted. Lily looked at Carol's hand, then she put hers on top of it. Bear watched this. Then he stood quietly and walked back out. Outside in the parking lot, he told his men. The reaction moved through the group differently for each of them. Ruckus closed his eyes and tilted his head back. Diesel said something under his breath that was probably a prayer or close enough. T-Bone nodded once firmly, the way you confirm something you'd already decided you were going to believe. Shepard shook hands with nobody, just made a fist and held it at his side for a moment before releasing it. Patch said nothing, but the particular tension that had been in his jaw since Willow Highway was gone. Good, Ruckus said finally, opening his eyes. Good. Don't celebrate yet, Bear said. Ruckus looked at him. She said they were working on his phone, Bear said. He might have made calls. Between the ditch and when they caught him, he had close to 2 hours on foot and at least some head start before the unit moved. He looked at each of them. We don't know yet what he set in motion before we ever saw Lily this morning. We don't know what was already planned. The quiet that followed was different from celebrating. You think there are others, Diesel said. I think Rick didn't build this thing alone, Bear said. I think a man who is specific enough to give an address and a time over the phone to someone he's expecting to receive a child, that man has done business with those people before. Or people like them. He paused. I think the cabin matters. I think whatever they found there matters. And I think until we know what's on that phone and who's on the other end of those numbers, this isn't over. Patch, who had been quiet through all of this, spoke. Does she know that? No, Bear said. Good bad, Patch said. She doesn't need to. Not today. At 2:15, a man Bear hadn't seen before came through the front doors of the station. He wore civilian clothes but carried himself with the exact posture of someone who had spent years not carrying himself that way in uniform. Late 40s, short gray hair, a face that had the particular set of someone who had spent a career making decisions with incomplete information and had gotten comfortable with the discomfort of that. He spoke to Sandra for 45 seconds. Sandra gestured toward Bear. The man walked over. You're the one who found her, he said. Not a question. We found her, Bear said. 6 of us. The man looked at him. Special Agent Darnell Briggs, FBI Field Office, out of Charleston. He didn't extend his hand, not rudely, just efficiently. I need to ask you some questions. Bear felt something shift in his understanding of the day. Not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of a suspicion he'd been carrying since Sandra first said it wasn't just a county matter anymore. All right, he said. Not here, Briggs said. Walk with me. They went to a far corner of the parking lot away from the others. Briggs stood with his back to the building facing the road, and Bear stood beside him, and they both looked at nothing in particular. Calloway, Briggs said. You know the name before today? No. He comes up in an investigation we've been running for 14 months. Briggs said, peripheral. We knew his name, we knew his association. We hadn't been able to put him inside the operation. He paused. Until the cabin. Bear kept his face neutral. What did you find? Briggs looked at him sideways. More than we expected, less than we needed. But combined with his phone, he stopped. His phone is unlocked now. We got into it 40 minutes ago. He made 3 calls between the time the truck went in the ditch and when the unit found him. Another pause. 2 of those calls went unanswered. The third one was answered and lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds is enough to say a location, Bear said. Briggs nodded. It's enough to say a lot of things in not many words. Yeah. So whoever he called, Bear said slowly, knows something went wrong, knows the cabin is blown, and knows there's a child somewhere in county custody who can put Calloway in a room and describe what she heard on a phone call 3 weeks ago. Briggs turned to face Bear fully now. You understand what I'm telling you. Bear understood exactly. She's a witness, he said. She's the only witness we currently have who was physically present and conscious during a conversation that ties Calloway to the network. Briggs said it plainly without apology, which Bear respected. The cabin gives us evidence of intent and preparation. The phone gives us numbers, but a 10-year-old Frau who heard words spoken in real time and can repeat them, that's something different and something harder to argue away in front of a jury. Bear was quiet for a moment. You're telling me she might need protection. I'm telling you that the people Calloway was working with, the people on the other end of those calls, they have resources. and they have significant motivation to ensure this case doesn't build any further than it currently is. He held Bear's gaze. I'm telling you that Millhaven County is a small station, and right now she's in it. And I'm telling you that we are moving to correct that situation as fast as we possibly can. But I'm also telling you because you're the one she trusts and the next hour matters. Bear looked at him for a long moment. What do you need from me? Right now, I need her to not leave this building with anyone until my people arrive. That includes child services. That includes any relative who might surface. That includes anyone who shows up claiming to be anything. He paused. Can you stay? I already told her I would, Bear said. Briggs nodded once. He almost looked relieved, and Bear had the sense that Briggs was not a man who allowed himself to look relieved very often or very obviously. Your chapter, Briggs said, not accusatory, just a statement. Yeah, Bear said. I know who you ride with, Briggs said. I want you to know that's not a factor in this conversation. Wasn't worried about it, Bear said. Briggs almost smiled. Almost. No, I don't suppose you were. He started to move back toward the building, then stopped. She told the deputy in her statement that when you crouched down on the road, the first thing you said to her was that nobody was going to take her anywhere. He didn't look at Bear when he said it, just looked at the road. She said she believed you. Bear said nothing. In my experience, Briggs said, kids that age, kids who've been through what she's been through, they've usually stopped believing things people say, pretty much entirely. He finally looked at Bear. That's not nothing. He walked back inside. Bear went back to his men. He told them the short version FBI existing investigation, the phone calls Rick made the next hour matters. He told it fast and clean and watched their faces as the shape of the day rearranged itself around them. So we're protection, Ruckus said. Not unhappily, just understanding. We're what we said we'd be, Bear said. We're staying. If someone shows up, Diesel started, then Sandra and Briggs handle it, Bear said. We are not the thing that handles it. We are the thing that stays calm and stays close and doesn't give anyone a reason to make this harder than it already is. He looked specifically at Ruckus when he said this. Ruckus, to his credit, met his eyes and nodded without argument. They repositioned without being asked T-Bone and Shepard near the parking lot entrance, visible and relaxed with the particular quality that large men who aren't trying to be threatening can project, which is a different and very useful thing from threatening. Diesel and Patch near the front doors. Ruckus stayed with Bear. You think someone actually comes here? Ruckus asked low. I think Rick made an 11-second phone call, Bear said. I think he told someone something in 11 seconds. I think what someone does with that information is not something I know. He paused. I think we stay ready without it being stupid. That's all. Ruckus nodded. He looked at the road. She ate that granola bar, he said out of nowhere. Bear glanced at him. Carol told me when she came out earlier, Ruckus said. She said Lily ate it and had the juice and asked if there was another one. Carol thought that was a good sign. He was quiet for a second. I thought that was a good sign too. It is, Bear said, chewing. At 3:40, a car pulled into the lot that nobody had been expecting. It came in slowly, a late model sedan, clean, nothing remarkable about it. It parked at the far end of the lot. T-Bone noticed it first. He didn't move toward it. He just shifted his weight and looked at Shepard, and Shepard looked back at him, and both of them were watching when the driver's door opened. A woman got out. Mid-40s professional clothes, hair pulled back. She stood beside her car and looked at the station entrance, and then she looked at the two large men standing near the entrance, and she stopped walking. T-Bone said calmly, conversationally, "Can we help you?" The woman looked at him. "I'm here about the girl," she said. "Lily Calloway. I'm her aunt, her mother's sister." She had a bag over her shoulder and something in her hand that looked like papers. "I got a call from Child Services. They said she was here." T-Bone looked at Shepard. Shepard was already moving not toward the woman, but toward the door going inside. "Ma'am," T-Bone said in the same calm tone, "why don't you just hold right there for 1 second? We're going to let the folks inside know you're here." The woman looked at him. Then she looked at the others at Diesel near the door at Bear and Ruckus by the building. Her expression was not quite what you'd expect from a relieved aunt arriving to collect a niece she'd been worried sick about. It was something more controlled than that, more careful. Is there a problem? She said. No problem, T-Bone said. Just procedure. Shepard was already inside. 30 seconds later, Sandra came out. She walked to the woman with her badge visible and her face professionally blank. Sandra Okafor Sheriff's Department, and you are Margaret Hale, the woman said. Lily is my niece. Christine was my sister. She held out the papers. I have identification and I have the emergency contact documentation that was filed with Lily's school last year. Christine listed me. I didn't know about any of this until 2 hours ago when Carol Simmons from Child Services called me. Sandra took the papers. She looked at them. She looked at the woman. When did you last speak with your sister? She said. Something moved across Margaret Hale's face. It was there and gone in under a second, but Bear standing 20 feet away caught it. He couldn't name exactly what it was, but he caught it. February, Margaret said. For the accident. We'd been out of touch. Christine and I had some distance between us in recent years. She paused. I regret that. And Rick Calloway, Sandra said. What's your relationship with him? I have no relationship with him, Margaret said firmly. I never approved of him. Christine knew that. It was part of why we had distance. She looked at the door. Can I see Lily? Sandra was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time when someone is waiting for an answer. I'm going to verify these documents, she said. It won't take long. In the meantime, can I get you to come inside and wait? Margaret Hale looked at the bikers. All 6 of them ranged across the parking lot. She looked at them with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not entirely succeeding. Are they coming inside too? She said. No, ma'am, Sandra said. They're fine right where they are. Bear didn't go in. He stayed where he was and he thought about that half-second expression on Margaret Hale's face. He thought about Carol calling her 2 hours ago. He thought about Rick's 11-second phone call. He thought about the timeline. He went over it once, then again. Then he walked quietly to the door and found Briggs, who was standing just inside the lobby with a coffee he wasn't drinking. Woman outside, Bear said low, says she's Lily's aunt, Christine's sister. Briggs looked at him over the coffee cup. Carol called her, Bear said. About 2 hours ago, she says. That would put the call at around 1:45. He paused. Rick's third call, the one that was answered for 11 seconds, what time was that? Briggs set the coffee down very deliberately. 1:52, he said. So Carol calls the aunt at 1:45, Bear said. And 7 minutes later, Rick, who is alone in the woods and on the run, makes a call that someone answers. He held Briggs's gaze. And now the aunt is here. Briggs was already moving. Not running. A man like Briggs didn't run through a sheriff's station, but moving with a purpose that was several steps beyond casual. Bear watched him go and stood in the doorway and let himself breathe. It might be nothing, a coincidence of timing. An aunt who genuinely got a call and drove fast because she was worried. The expression on her face might be nothing more than the expression of a woman who was already grieving a sister and was now confronting a parking lot full of bikers. It might be nothing. But Bear's gut had been doing this work for 30 years, and his gut was not telling him it was nothing. Inside the room where Lily was sitting, Carol noticed a change in the air before she could explain what caused it. A shift in the station's baseline sound voices in the lobby going quieter in a particular way. She looked at the door. She looked at Lily. I'll be right back, Carol said. No, Lily said. Quickly, she looked at the door. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Carol said. But she stood up. You made the same face Bear makes when something's happening, Lily said. Right before he does something, it's that exact face. Carol looked at her. 10 years old, barefoot since before dawn, had been through more in the past 12 hours, more in the past 7 months than most people navigate in a decade. And she could read a face well enough to know when an adult was managing information. Someone is here saying they're your aunt, Carol said. She made the decision to tell her plainly because Lily had earned plain. Margaret Hale, she says she's your mother's sister. Lily stared. Her face went through something, not one emotion, but many of them layered in rapid succession. Aunt Maggie, she said, you know her. I haven't seen her since I was 6, Lily said. She and my mom didn't talk. She was thinking hard. Bear could have told you because her eyes had gone to that particular unfocused place where people are not looking at what's in front of them, but it's something internal. Why is she here? She says Child Services called her, Carol said. That I called her. Lily looked at her sharply. Did you? Carol was quiet for one beat too long. I made several calls this afternoon, she said carefully, to people on the emergency contact record that was filed with your school. That was Aunt Maggie on that record, Lily said. Yes, Carol said. Your mother filed it. Lily absorbed this. My mom filed it, she repeated slowly. Before the accident. She was quiet. Before Rick. She looked at the door again. I don't have to go with her right now, do I? No, Carol said firmly. Absolutely not. Nobody is taking you anywhere right now. She paused. Do you want to see her? Lily thought about it, and what she said next was the thing that Carol would repeat later to Sandra, and Sandra would repeat to Briggs, and Briggs would look at very carefully. I want to see Bear first, Lily said. I want to know what he thinks. Bear came in when Carol came to get him. He sat across from Lillian. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and for a moment they just existed in the same room with the same question between them. You know her, Bear said. This Margaret. I knew her when I was little, Lily said. She was nice. She smelled like lemons, and she always brought books. But that was a long time ago. She looked at her hands. My mom stopped talking about her when things got bad, when Rick came. She looked up. Do you think she's safe? Bear held her gaze. He told her the truth or the most honest version of it that didn't put more weight on a child than she could carry. I don't know yet, he said. But here's what I do know. You are not going anywhere with anybody until every person in this building is sure it's right. Not her, not anyone. Okay. Okay, she said. Then Bear. Yeah. Rick made a phone call, she said. When he was running, I heard one of the deputies say it. She looked at him steadily. He always made phone calls when things went wrong, even with debt collectors, even with the men who came to the house. He always called someone. Her voice was very even. You think he called Aunt Maggie? Bear looked at her. The question hung in the air between them, clear and precise, and 10 years old and utterly devastating. That's what some people are figuring out right now, he said. She nodded slowly. Then she said something that made Bear's chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. My mom trusted her, she said. She put her name on that paper at school, which means she thought even when they weren't talking, she thought if something ever happened, Aunt Maggie would be safe. She paused. I want that to still be true. Bear looked at this child, this exhausted, barefoot, unbroken child, who had run through the dark for hours and walked into a sheriff's station and told her story and eaten a granola bar, and was now sitting here hoping that her dead mother's judgment about a person had not been proved wrong, and he felt something move through him that he had no good name for. It wasn't pity. It was closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast. Me too, kid, he said quietly. Me too. 3 minutes later, Briggs knocked on the doorframe. Bear looked at him. Briggs's expression was exactly as controlled as it had been all afternoon, except for his eyes. And what Bear saw in Briggs's eyes, in that carefully managed face in those 2 seconds of eye contact, was not the look of a man who had verified a document and found nothing wrong. It was the look of a man who had found exactly what he was afraid of finding. Bear stood up. He touched Lily's shoulder, one steady, brief reel. He looked at Carol. Don't move from this room, he said. Carol nodded. She understood the instruction, the same way T-Bone understood a shift in the parking lot, and Patch understood the silence before something happened. She understood it completely. Bear walked out. The door closed behind him, and in the hallway, Briggs turned and said 3 words at barely above a whisper, and the 3 words rearranged everything Bear thought he understood about this day. The aunt's dirty, Briggs said. 3 words. That was all, and yet Bear stood in that hallway and felt the entire architecture of the day shift beneath him like a floor that had been solid and suddenly wasn't. How dirty, he said. Briggs didn't flinch at the directness of the question. Her name is in the phone, he said. Not under Margaret Hale, under a contact saved as M. 3 calls over the past 6 weeks from Calloway's number. One of them lasted 22 minutes. He paused. The call Rick made from the woods, the 11-second one that got answered. That was M. Bear said nothing. He was doing the math. 6 weeks of calls, 22 minutes. An aunt who hadn't seen Lily since she was 6 years old. An aunt who showed up with documentation inside 2 hours of being called. The paper she brought, Bear said. Legitimate, Briggs said. Lily's mother did file her as emergency contact 3 years ago, before things changed. He let that land. Christine Calloway filed the paperwork in good faith. Margaret Hale's presence on that document is real. Her intentions today are not. So she's here to take her, Bear said. She's here to try, Briggs said. And she has enough legal cover to create serious complications if we handle this wrong. He looked at Bear steadily, which is why I'm talking to you before I walk back in that lobby. Because how the next 15 minutes go matters. What do you need? I need Lily to stay in that room with Carol. I need your people outside to stay exactly where they are and not give Margaret Hale's eventual lawyer a single thing to work with. And I need you to understand that I am going to walk into that lobby and I am going to arrest Margaret Hale, and it is going to be loud and it is going to be ugly, and the person I most need to not hear it is a 10-year-old girl 20 feet away. Bear looked at him. I'll take care of that. Briggs nodded. He straightened his jacket. He had the look of a man who had done things like this before and knew exactly which parts of it would be clean and which parts wouldn't. One more thing, he said. When this goes down, when it becomes real to Hale that she's being arrested, there's a possibility she talks. People in her position sometimes decide very quickly that cooperation is more valuable than loyalty. He paused. If she talks, we may learn things about this network that go well beyond Rick Calloway, which is good, which is what we want. Another pause. It also means this case gets significantly larger than a county sheriff's station. Lily's role as a witness becomes significantly more important, and the protection question becomes significantly more serious. Understood, Bear said. You understand all of that. Every word, Bear said. Briggs studied him for one more second, then he walked toward the lobby. Bear turned and went back to the room. Carol looked up when he came through the door. Lily looked up. Bear closed the door behind him and stood with his back against it. I need you both to stay in this room, he said. And I need you, he looked at Lily specifically, to not react to anything you might hear. Whatever sounds come from out there, whatever voices you stay in here, and you look at Carol and you breathe. Can you do that? Lily stared at him. She was putting it together. He could see her doing it fast, intuitive, the way she'd been doing it all day. It's Aunt Maggie, she said, not a question. Bear didn't confirm it and didn't deny it. Can you do what I'm asking? She looked at the door. Then she looked at her hands. Then she made a decision that was visible in the set of her jaw and the straightness of her back. Yes, she said. Good. He looked at Carol. Carol gave him a nod that said she understood everything that had just been communicated through what hadn't been said. Bear positioned himself with his back fully against the door, not because he was physically preventing entry, but because his presence there created a kind of gravity, a fact on the ground. If anyone came through that door in the next few minutes, they would come through it knowing he was there. He waited. In the lobby, Margaret Hale was sitting in one of the 4 plastic chairs against the wall. She had her phone in her hand and was looking at it with the particular intensity of someone composing a message or reading one or deciding whether to send one. She'd been in the station for 21 minutes. Sandra had offered her water. She had declined. Briggs came through the interior door. He walked toward her at a pace that was brisk without being aggressive. And she looked up, and in the half second before she composed her expression into something appropriate for the situation, in that half second something crossed her face that was neither the relief of a concerned aunt nor the impatience of someone waiting for bureaucracy to clear. It was calculation, pure, rapid, cold calculation. Then it was gone, and she was standing, and she was saying, Agent. Margaret Hale, Briggs said. He had his badge out. I need you to put the phone down on the seat, please. She looked at the badge. She looked at the phone. I'm just phone on the seat, Briggs said. Now, please. She put it down. Her hand was steady. That told Briggs something. People who are genuinely surprised by law enforcement rarely have steady hands in the first moment of contact. Is there a problem? She said. I have a warrant for your arrest in connection with an ongoing federal investigation, Briggs said. He recited the charge clearly and without drama. Conspiracy, facilitation, the specific language of a case that had been building for 14 months and had just found its load-bearing wall in an 11-second phone call made from a man sitting on a log in the woods. Margaret Hale was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which she looked at Briggs and at Sandra, who had come up on her left, and at the door through which she'd entered, and at the phone she'd put on the seat. 4 seconds in which an entire internal negotiation took place, one that Bear, had he been watching, would have recognized immediately as the negotiation between loyalty and self-preservation. Then she said, "I want to talk." Briggs said, "I know you do." Bear heard none of this directly. What he heard was voices muffled, controlled, never reaching the pitch of a scene, and then the particular quality of silence that follows something significant. Then Ruckus's voice from outside, low in surprise, saying something to Diesel that Bear couldn't make out through the wall. He looked at Lily. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, looking at a point on the wall past Carol's shoulder. Her breathing was controlled. Whatever was happening behind her eyes, her body was doing exactly what Bear had asked. "You're doing great," Bear said. She looked at him. "Did they arrest her?" "I don't know what happened," Bear said. "Technically true." "Bear." "Lily." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "My mom put her name on that paper." She'd said it before, almost the exact same words. But this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like someone revising something. Like someone returning to a belief they'd held and running their hands over it to find where it had cracked. "She thought she was protecting me," Lily said. "She put Maggie's name on that paper because she thought if something happened to her, Maggie would protect me." "Yes," Bear said. "But Maggie didn't," Lily said. The plainness of it was almost unbearable. No accusation in her voice, no tears, just the flat, clear-eyed accounting of someone who had been doing inventory on the people in her life and finding the numbers didn't add up. "Your mom loved you," Bear said. "She made the best decision she had the information to make. That's all anyone can do." Lily considered this. "Were you ever wrong about someone?" she said. Bear thought about it honestly. "Yeah," he said, "more than once." "What did you do?" "I tried to do better next time," he said, "and I tried not to let it make me stop trusting people altogether. Because if you stop trusting everyone because some people let you down, you end up alone." He paused. "And alone is worse." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. "You have 5 friends," she said, "out there, and you've had them for years. I can tell by how you talk to each other." She looked at the door. "I used to have friends before February." She stopped. Everything kind of stopped after February. Carol made a small sound that she quickly contained. Bear leaned forward. "It starts again," he said. "That's the thing nobody tells you enough. After the worst thing, it starts again. Not the same, but it starts." Lily looked at him. "Promise?" He held her gaze and he said, for the second time that day, the word that she had already established she did not extend lightly and did not receive lightly. "Promise." Sandra knocked twice and opened the door. She looked at Bear. "You should come out," she said. Her voice was even, but her eyes said, "This is important and it's happening now." Bear looked at Lily. "Carol stays with you. I'll be right back, same as before." "I know," Lily said. "Same as before." He went into the hallway. Sandra pulled the door shut and dropped her voice. "Hale is talking," she said. "She opened up the minute Briggs confirmed she was being arrested. She's been talking for 6 minutes and she hasn't stopped." She paused. "She gave us 2 names. Both are known to Briggs from the investigation. One of them—" She stopped. She looked at the floor briefly, then back up. "One of them has a prior federal conviction for the same category of crime. He was released 14 months ago." She paused again. 14 months ago is when Briggs's investigation started. Bear put the pieces together. "The investigation started because this person was released," he said. "Because they picked up right where they stopped," Sandra said. "And Calloway was one of his new contacts. And Hale was she's related to this person. The second name she gave us." "Related how?" "The prior conviction," Sandra said. "His name is Victor Hale, her husband." Bear stood very still. "She was here," Sandra continued, "because Victor called her after Rick called her. Rick told her the situation. Victor told her what to do. Get to the girl, get her out through legal channels before federal protection could be established." She looked at the closed door behind which Lily was sitting with Carol. They knew about the emergency contact paperwork. They've known about it. Victor Hale has been. Briggs thinks he's had eyes on this for weeks. On Lily specifically, because Calloway told him about her. Rick told his wife's brother-in-law about Lily, Bear said. Rick told him everything, Sandra said. According to Hale, Calloway came to Victor 3 months ago. He needed money. He offered. She stopped. Her professional composure held, but just barely. He offered a solution to the debt problem that involved Lily. Victor saw an opportunity. He'd been operating for months trying to rebuild the network he had before his conviction. Lily was going to be the proof of concept, the thing that established his credibility with new partners. The hallway was very quiet. Where is Victor Hale right now? Bear said. Sandra looked at him. That, she said, is the question Briggs is currently very motivated to answer. He's not at the registered home address. His car was flagged 20 minutes ago on Route 7. She paused. Route 7 goes south from Millhaven, through the county. Another pause. There are 3 ways to reach this station from Route 7. Bear turned immediately toward the front doors. My people outside. I know, Sandra said. Bear. She caught his arm, not restraining, just stopping. Briggs has units moving. We have people coming. This building is not unprotected. She held his gaze. But Victor Hale is not Rick Calloway. He is not a desperate man making bad decisions in a panic. He has done this before, and he has resources, and he is not going to walk into a sheriff's station. She paused, which means we need to think about what he might do instead of that. Bear thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. He doesn't come here, he said. He waits. He finds out where they take her. Temporary placement, foster family, wherever child services puts her tonight. His voice was flat and certain. He's not coming here. He's going to let the system move her. And then he moves on her after. Sandra's face confirmed it. That's exactly what Briggs said. So what happens to her tonight? Bear said. Where does she go? That, Sandra said, is what Carol and Briggs are currently figuring out. The standard placement protocols, they're not adequate for this situation. Briggs wants federal protection. That takes time to establish formally. There's a window. She looked at Bear. A window tonight, between when she leaves here and when formal protection is in place. The word window hung between them like something with weight. Outside, Ruckus had clocked the car. He didn't know it was Victor Hale's. He had no way of knowing that. What he knew was that in the past 20 minutes, one specific arm had driven past the station entrance 3 times. Not pulled in, not slowed down to look. Just driven past on the road at normal speed in a normal pattern, except that normal people drove past a sheriff's station once. Twice if they missed a turn, not 3 times. He didn't say anything to the others immediately. He watched. On the 4th pass, he walked casually to where T-Bone and Shepard were standing, and he said without looking at the road, Gray Chevy, plate starting with K7, passed 4 times in 20 minutes, northeast to southwest, same direction each time. T-Bone didn't look either. Time between passes, about 4 or 5 minutes, Ruckus said, like he's circling a block. Shepard already had his phone out. He looked like he was checking a message. He was memorizing the plate. Tell Bear, T-Bone said. Ruckus went inside Pete. He found Bear in the hallway with Sandra. He gave Bear the information in 6 words. Gray Chevy circling 4 times plate. He read the plate numbers. Bear looked at Sandra. Sandra was already on her radio. The response came back in under 90 seconds. The plate came back to a vehicle registered to a property management company in Charleston. The company name meant nothing. The registered address was a mail drop. But Briggs, who was listening from the room where Margaret Hale was still talking, came out of that room with an expression that confirmed everything. Victor drives 3 registered vehicles, Briggs said, none of them in his name. One of them is a gray Chevrolet registered to a shell company in Charleston. He looked at Ruckus. Say the plate again. Ruckus said it. Briggs said, that's him. The hallway went electric. He came himself, Bear said. He came himself, Briggs confirmed. And the fact of it, a careful, experienced network operating criminal driving himself in circles past a sheriff's station said something specific about the level of Victor Hale's investment in the outcome of this particular situation. He hadn't sent someone. He'd come. which meant Lily was not a transaction to him. She had become something personal, something he intended to control directly. He's not coming in, Bear said again. He's mapping. He's looking at the exits. He's figuring out what time she leaves and in what vehicle. Units are converging, Briggs said. He was on his radio now, and the controlled urgency in his voice was the particular sound of someone managing multiple moving pieces and knowing that timing was the only thing between a good outcome and a catastrophic one. I need that car stopped before the next pass. If he sees units, he may run, and then we lose the element of or, Bear said. Briggs looked at him. Or you don't put units on the road, Bear said. You let him make one more pass. And on that pass, you have people ready to move the moment he slows, not before, the moment he does anything other than drive straight. He paused. If you flood the road with units now, he runs. He has a head start, and he knows this county better than your people do, or he wouldn't have risked coming himself. Briggs looked at Bear for a long moment. The look of a federal agent considering the advice from a man whose jacket had a Hells Angels patch on the back was not an entirely simple look. But Briggs was also a man who had gotten to where he was by being honest about where good information came from, regardless of its source. 2 minutes, Briggs said. If he doesn't pass again in 2 minutes, we move regardless. Agreed, Bear said. So, 1 minute and 40 seconds later, Ruckus, standing casually near the front entrance, said without turning his head, "Here he comes." The gray Chevy was moving at exactly the speed limit. Everything about it was calibrated to invisibility, the speed, the lane position, the lack of any sudden movement. The driver was doing everything right. He was just doing it for the 5th time on the same stretch of road. Briggs's radio crackled once. He said 2 words into it. The units that had been staged 2 blocks east and 1 block west of the station moved simultaneously. They came in from both directions, not with lights, initially just 2 vehicles converging at a pace that left the gray Chevy exactly one option, and that option was not escape. The lights came on when the gap had closed to 30 feet. Bear, standing in the doorway, watched the gray Chevy's brake lights flare. He watched it pull to the shoulder. He watched the units box it in with the smooth efficiency of people who had practiced this exact motion and knew how little room for error existed in it. He watched the driver's door open. He watched a man late 40s, heavy-set calm in the way of someone who had decided that displaying calm was his best remaining option, step out with his hands visible. Victor Hale looked from a distance like someone's accountant. He looked like someone you'd see at a hardware store on a Saturday or arguing about a bill at a restaurant. He did not look like the reason a 10-year-old girl had run barefoot through dark woods before sunrise. Most things that destroy people's lives, Bear had learned a long time ago, don't look like what they are. Briggs walked out of the building past Bear. He walked to the road with the stride of a man who had been building to this moment for 14 months. Bear watched him go. Inside the room, Lily heard the radios and the voices change in pitch, and she looked at Carol, and Carol looked back at her with an expression that was trying very hard to stay neutral. "Is it over?" Lily said. Carol thought about what the honest answer was and what the kind answer was and whether they were the same. "Something important just happened," she said. I think it's moving toward over." Lily was quiet. Then, "Where will I go tonight?" Carol had been dreading this question and had known it was coming and still wasn't entirely ready for it. "We're figuring that out," she said. "I promise you it will be somewhere safe." "With someone who knows," Lily said. "Not just a stranger who gets a call and doesn't know what happened." "Yes," Carol said. "Someone who knows and understands the situation." Lily nodded slowly. She looked at the door. "Do you think Bear would—" She started the sentence and then stopped it. The stopping was careful and deliberate and said more than the starting did. Carol looked at her. "Do I think Bear would what?" she said gently. Lily shook her head. "Money," she said. "It's a lot to ask." "You can ask things," Carol said. "You're allowed to ask things, Lily." Lily looked at her hands. "Do you think he'd want to know," she said finally, "later, after, where I end up, if I'm okay?" She paused. "Or is this one of those things where people help and then they go away and that's the end of it?" Carol felt something happen behind her sternum that she was professionally trained to manage and was currently managing with effort. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should ask him that yourself." Bear came back into the room 7 minutes after Victor Hale's car was stopped. He came in quietly, which was a relative term for a man his size, and he sat down across from Lily, and he looked at her face, and she looked at his. "It's done," he said. "The people who were supposed to hurt you, they're not going anywhere, any of them." Lily held his gaze for a long moment. Then she exhaled not a small breath, but a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind a person takes when they've been holding themselves braced against impact for so long that releasing it feels almost like falling. "Okay," she said. Her voice was smaller than usual. Not afraid, just released. Like something that had been under pressure for months and had finally been permitted to just be its actual size. "You're going to stay somewhere safe tonight," Bear said. "Carol's working on it. Good people." "I know," Lily said. Then she looked at him with the directness that had been there since the beginning, since she'd grabbed his jacket on the road and searched his face for a lie, and she asked the thing she'd stopped herself from asking. "Will you come back," she said, "after, when things settle? Will you come back and tell me it's really over?" Bear looked at her. He thought about what he could honestly promise and what he couldn't. He thought about what a 10-year-old girl who had lost everything that was supposed to protect her actually needed to hear, and more importantly, what he actually intended. "Yeah," he said, "I'll come back." "Even though you don't have to," she said. It wasn't a question, it was a test. The most important kind, the kind you give to people, not to catch them failing, but to give them the chance to show you they won't. "Even though I don't have to," Bear said. She nodded once. Then she reached into the pocket of her torn shirt, the same shirt she'd been wearing when she ran, the same one with the sleeve torn at the shoulder, and she took out something small. A thin leather cord with a simple braid. She held it out across the table. "I made it," she said, "at school, before everything." She looked at it. "I carry it because my mom touched it." She tied the first knot. She looked up at him. "I want you to have it." Bear looked at the bracelet in her hand. He looked at her face. He reached across the table and he took it. He turned it over in his fingers, rough, calloused fingers that had held handlebars in all weather, that had worked and fought and built things, and he held this small, braided cord with the same care he'd used when he first caught her by the shoulders on that road. Like something fragile, like something that mattered, so. "Thank you," he said. "Don't lose it," she said. "I won't," he said. Outside in the parking lot, Ruckus was sitting on the curb, and Diesel was standing, and Patch and T-Bone and Shepherd were ranged around in the easy, unself-conscious proximity of men who had spent years in each other's company. None of them were talking. They were just there in the late afternoon, waiting for Bear to come out and tell them what came next. The sun was lower than it had been. The day had run long and run hard and wasn't quite finished yet. And inside the station, in a plastic chair at a table with a box of tissues, in an empty juice cup, a 10-year-old girl with no shoes sat with her hands in her lap and allowed herself for the first time since February to believe that the people who were supposed to protect her actually would. Carol found the placement by 5 o'clock. Her name was Ruth Adler. 63 years old, retired school teacher, licensed foster parent, with 17 years of experience, and a file that Briggs's team ran through every available database in under 20 minutes and came back clean in every direction. She lived 12 miles south of Millhaven in a house that had seen dozens of children come through it in crisis and leave it in something closer to wholeness. Carol had placed children with Ruth before. She trusted her the way you trust a specific bridge over a specific river, not because bridges never fail, but because this one had held every time you'd needed it to. She told Bear first. She wasn't sure why she did it in that order, told him, before she told Sandra, before she finalized anything formally. She just found herself in the hallway with the information and found herself walking toward Bear with it. Maybe because Lily had asked her if Bear would want to know. Maybe because it seemed right that the man who had held that child on a motorcycle at 70 miles an hour, while her stepfather's truck tried to cut them off, should know where she was going to sleep tonight. "Ruth Adler," Carol said. "She's good. She's genuinely good." "She knows the situation," Bear said. "Not the general situation. The specific one. Victor Hale. The network. The fact that a federal case was now built in significant part around what a 10-year-old girl had heard on a staircase 3 weeks ago." "Briggs spoke with her directly," Carol said. Her home address is not in any documentation that leaves this building tonight. The placement is off the standard record for the next 72 hours until formal federal protection protocols are in place. She paused. Briggs' people will have eyes on the house. Bear nodded. How does Lily get there? Carol's car, Sandra said, coming up behind them. Unmarked, not a county vehicle. I drive. Carol rides with Lily. She looked at Bear. Briggs wanted me to ask you something. Bear waited. He wants to know if you'd be willing to ride out in front, Sandra said. Not close enough to be obviously connected. Just present. On the road. In case. She held his gaze. It's not an official request. He can't make it official, but he said, she paused. He said, you've been the most useful non-badge in the room all day, and he sees no reason to stop using what's working. Bear almost smiled. Almost. Tell him yes. He went outside and told his men. He gave it to them straight, all of it. Ruth Adler, the address they weren't being given, but the route they were the 12 miles south Briggs' request. Nobody asked if they were going. The question never came up. Ruckus was already putting his helmet on before Bear finished the sentence. Diesel stretched his back and rolled his shoulders the way he did before a long ride. Patch checked his mirrors without being asked, and T-Bone and Shepard exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation about positioning and spacing and who took which lane that neither of them needed to say out loud. Tight formation or spread? T-Bone asked. Spreaded, Bear said. We're not an escort. We're just on the same road. Got it, T-Bone said. Ruckus looked at Bear. She know we're doing this? No, Bear said. Should she? Bear thought about it. A 10-year-old girl who had already learned too young that adults arrange things without telling her that the world operated in decisions made above her head and delivered to her as facts. He thought about what it would mean to her to know not just that she was being protected, but that she was being protected by choice. That 6 men who had no obligation to her whatsoever were choosing on a Saturday evening to ride 12 miles because she mattered. Yeah, Bear said. She should know. He went back inside. He knocked on the door frame of the room. Carol looked up. Lily looked up. Bear stood in the doorway. We're going to ride out ahead of Carol's car, he said. On the road to where you're going tonight. Not right in front, just on the same road. So you're not alone on it. Lily looked at him. She was sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around them in a posture that was simultaneously very young and very self-contained. You don't have to do that, she said. The same thing she'd said about so many of the things they'd done today. You don't have to. I know, Bear said. Same answer as always. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked past him toward the front of the building, toward where she knew his men were waiting in the parking lot. All of them, she said. All 6, Bear said. Something moved across her face that was too big and too layered to name cleanly. Her jaw tightened the way jaws tighten when someone is managing emotion they've decided not to release right now. Her eyes went bright for exactly 2 seconds, and then she blinked it back. And when she looked at him again, she had that steadiness, the one that had been there since the road, the one that Bear was increasingly certain was not a mask she put on, but a real thing she had built in herself through months of needing it. Okay, she said. Okay, Bear said. He started to turn. She said, Bear. He turned back. Thank you, she said, for stopping. She paused. On the road, this morning. Thank you for stopping. Bear looked at her. He thought about 11 years of leading that chapter, of making decisions of the things he'd done that he was proud of and the things he wasn't. He thought about waking up this morning with no plan beyond 2 hours of quiet on a road nobody drove anymore. Thank you for running toward us, he said, instead of away. Lily held his gaze. Then she nodded once with a gravity that belonged to someone much older and looked back at her knees. They left the station at 5:42. Sandra drove Carol's car with Carol and Lily in the back. The car pulled out of the lot quietly, no lights. Nothing to announce it. 2 of Briggs' vehicles were already positioned 1/4 mile ahead, 1/4 mile behind. The operation of moving one child 12 miles had the infrastructure of something much larger because it was. Because Lily was the thread that held a 14-month federal case together, and the people who wanted that thread cut were now arrested but not yet without allies. The 6 bikes spread out onto Route 7 heading south 300 yards ahead of Sandra's car. Loose formation, casual spacing. They looked like what they were, 6 men on a Saturday evening ride, which was the exact truth and also the exact cover. Ruckus rode second from front, just off Bear's right. He'd been quieter than usual since the parking lot since they'd gotten the full picture from Bear. He was 29 years old and he'd grown up in a family that had its own complicated history with men who made bad decisions about money and worse decisions about the people around them. He didn't share this. He just rode and thought about it and let the road move under him. After 4 miles, he came up alongside Bear and said over the comm, "She's going to be okay, right?" Bear didn't answer immediately. He thought about what honest sounded like versus what comforting sounded like, and whether in this specific case they were the same. "She's going to be okay," he said, and he meant it, not as a reassurance, as a statement of intent, as the kind of thing you say that is also a promise to make it true through whatever continuation it requires. Ruckus went back to his position. The 9 miles passed, then 10, 11, and then Ruckus said over the comm in a voice that was completely flat, "Bear, black SUV coming up fast on our 6. Bear checked his mirror. There it was, a dark SUV, no plates visible at this distance, moving at a speed that was noticeably faster than traffic and not slowing down for it. He ran the calculation. Briggs's follow car was a quarter-mile behind Sandra's car. Sandra's car was 300 yards behind the bikes. The SUV was behind all of it and closing. "Briggs," Bear said. He didn't have a comm to Briggs. He looked at Shepard. "Get Briggs on the phone." Shepard already had it to his ear. 3 seconds. 5. Shepard said, "He sees it. His follow car is moving to intercept." He paused, listening. Briggs says, "Hold position." "Hold position? Don't accelerate, don't slow, don't change the spacing. Let the professionals handle it." Bear understood the instruction, and he understood why it was right, and he held his throttle exactly where it was and watched his mirror and felt every muscle in his body want to do something other than hold position. The SUV came on fast. Briggs' follow car swung out behind it. The SUV didn't slow. It moved left, accelerating harder, and Bear watched it come past the follow car, past the distance marker, in his head where it should have stopped or slowed, and it didn't stop and it didn't slow. "Bear," Ruckus started. "I see it," Bear said. The SUV was going to reach Sandra's car. The math was simple and irrefutable. Briggs's follow car was behind it and moving, but not fast enough to close the gap before the SUV reached the sedan. The vehicle ahead of Sandra Briggs' lead car was a quarter-mile up the road and turning around, which took time, that the SUV's speed was consuming faster than could be recovered. Bear did the math in 1 second and made the decision in the next. "Spread and drop," he said into the comm, "now." He didn't wait to see if they understood. He braked hard and swung wide, and the formation came apart exactly the way it was supposed to. Ruckus and Diesel swinging wide left T-Bone and Shepard wide right, Patch dropping back in center, and Bear himself cutting his speed dramatically and moving to the center of the road, filling the lane not with aggression but with mass. Pure, unavoidable mass. The SUV came around the curve and found 6 motorcycles arranged across 2 lanes in a pattern that required either a significant speed reduction to navigate or a collision. It slowed, not stopped, not immediately. But it slowed, and that 3-second reduction in speed was enough for Briggs's follow car to close the gap enough for the lead car to complete its turn and come back down the road with lights on, enough for the window to close around the SUV, the way Briggs had closed the window around Victor Hale's gray Chevy 2 hours earlier. The SUV stopped. Bear held his position in the center of the lane. His engine was running, his hands were on the bars. He watched the SUV, and the SUV sat there, and for 7 seconds, nothing moved on that road except the sound of engines. Then Briggs's follow car's doors opened, then the lead car, and the people who got out were not asking questions. Okay. Bear moved off to the shoulder. His men came in around him, engines dropping to idle. Sandra's car had stopped 50 yards back. Bear could see it in his mirror, just sitting there, no movement exactly as it should be. His comm crackled. Shepard's phone. He held it out to Bear. Briggs' voice. "2 individuals. We're running the plates now. Your people okay?" "Yes," Bear said. "That was not what I would call holding position," Briggs said. There was something in his voice that was not quite anger and not quite approval, and existed in the complicated space between them. "No." Bear agreed, a pause. The lead car was 45 seconds out when you moved, Briggs said. I know, oh, Bear said. Another pause, longer. The sedan with the girl is undamaged and stationary, and Carol reports that Lily is fine. He paused. She said, Briggs stopped. He seemed to be deciding something. Carol says Lily's exact words when the SUV stopped were, quote, I knew they'd stop it. A beat. I thought you should know that. Bear said nothing. He looked at the road. She knew, Ruckus said quietly from beside him. He'd heard it through the phone. She knew we'd stop it. Yeah, Bear said. They sat on the shoulder for 4 minutes while Briggs's people managed the SUV and its occupants. 2 men, both with records, both with ties to Victor Hale's network, a network that was now Briggs would tell. Bear later effectively dismantled at its operational core in a single day. The 2 names Margaret Hale had given. Victor himself, Rick Calloway, and now these 2, the last moving piece of something that had been 11 months in the building and 40 minutes in the falling. Ruth Adler's house was the last 12 minutes of the ride. The SUV situation cleared the road, confirmed clean ahead and behind, and Sandra's car moved again, and the 6 bikes moved ahead of it in the last stretch of the day, unrolled quiet and unremarkable under the early evening. Ruth was standing outside when they arrived. She was a compact woman, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had probably looked exactly like this for 20 years, settled into itself, comfortable with complexity, quietly immovable. She watched the motorcycles pull up and didn't flinch. She'd been told who was coming. She'd been told all of it. Sandra brought Lily out of the car. Lily stood on the driveway and looked at the house, and then she looked at Bear on his bike, and Bear looked back at her. He'd shut the engine off. All 6 of them had. The sudden quiet was enormous. This is Ruth, Carol said. I told you about her. Lily looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at Lily with the direct, gentle attention of someone who had seen many frightened children walk up this driveway and knew that what they needed in the first moment was not warmth or cheerfulness or a flood of reassurance, but simply to be seen clearly. To have someone look at them without pity and without performance. Just seeing. Hi, Lily, Ruth said. Hi, Lily said. Are you hungry? Lily thought about it. Yes, she said with something close to surprise, as if hunger were a sensation she'd just rediscovered and wasn't sure she had permission for. Good, Ruth said. Come inside and tell me what you like. Lily took a step. Then she stopped. She turned around. She looked at all 6 of them, Bear and Ruckus and Diesel and Patch and T-Bone and Shepherd, 6 men on 6 bikes in the fading light in their leather and their road dust and their complicated history, and she looked at them the way you look at something you're trying to memorize. Will you really come back, she said, to Bear specifically, but also in some way to all of them. Bear got off his bike. He walked to her. He crouched down to her level the way he'd done this morning on Willow Highway. Same road dust, same man, different version of the same moment, and he looked her in the eye. 3 weeks, he said. Give you time to settle. Then we come back. All of us. He paused. If that's okay with you. It's okay with me, she said. He stood. She looked at him one more moment. Then she reached up and very deliberately touched the leather bracelet on his wrist, the one she'd given him an hour ago, the one with the knot her mother had tied. Just touched it briefly with 2 fingers, confirming it was there, confirming he still had it. Then she turned and walked into Ruth's house. They rode back toward Millhaven in the dark. No comms, no conversation. Just the road and the engines and the particular silence of men who had spent a day being more than what most people expected them to be, and were processing that privately the way men like them process most things in motion in the wind, with the road doing the talking. Ruckus was the one who eventually said something. He said it about halfway back in a gap in the engine noise when they were coasting down a long grade, and his voice came through the comm, unexpected and quiet. You think she's going to be all right? Not just tonight, long term. Nobody answered immediately. The road held the question. Then Patch, who spoke rarely and never without purpose, said she ran toward us. A pause. Kid who runs towards 6 strangers on motorcycles when she's that scared, that's not just luck or desperation. That's something in her. Another pause. She's going to be all right. The rest of the ride was quiet. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind that accumulates between people who've been through something together and don't need to perform what it meant. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday, 6 motorcycles turned onto a residential road 12 miles south of Millhaven. It was early afternoon, clear and cool, the kind of October day that makes the trees look like they're competing with each other. Ruth was in the front yard when they pulled up. She looked at them with an expression that was dry and fond in equal measure. "She's been watching the driveway since 9 this morning," and she said, "Just so you know." Bear smiled, a real one, fully deployed. "How is she?" "Eating properly," Ruth said. "Sleeping better than the first week. Talking to a counselor 3 times a week, woman named Dr. Evers, who is very good at her job." She paused. "She has nightmares still. Probably will for a while, but she wakes up and she talks about them instead of holding them alone. That's the difference." She looked at Bear. "She talks about you. All of you. The men on the road." "Good things, hopefully," Diesel said. Ruth gave him a look that contained several chapters of a book she didn't need to write out loud. "She made something for you," she said, looking at Bear. "She'll tell you about it herself." She nodded toward the door. The door opened before Bear could take a step. Lily stood in the doorway. She was wearing shoes. Her hair was clean and loose. She looked rested in a way that was also somehow different from just sleep, rested in the deeper sense. Like something that had been braced internally for a long time had been allowed to come down. She looked at Bear. She looked at the others. Then she walked down the steps and across the short distance between them, and she stopped in front of Bear and held up her hand. In her palm was a leather bracelet, wider than the one she'd given him at the station, more carefully made with a braid that was even and deliberate. Woven into the center of it, small and unmistakable, was a shape stitched in black thread, a wing. The kind you'd see on a patch, the kind you'd see on a jacket. "I looked it up," she said, "what the emblem looks like. I wanted to get it right." She looked at it in her hand. "Ruth helped me with the stitching." Bear looked at the bracelet. He looked at the small, serious, surviving face of the girl who had made it. "It's for all of you," she said, "but I only had enough leather for one." She looked at Ruckus, then Diesel, then the others. "So maybe you could share it. Take turns. Or," she stopped, "I can make more. Ruth said she'd take me to get more leather." "We'll take turns," Ruckus said before anyone else could speak. His voice was completely steady, which was a significant achievement. Diesel nodded. T-Bone and Shepherd and Patch nodded. Bear took the bracelet from her hand. He turned it over. He looked at the wing in the center, the careful stitching, the knot at the clasp that was clean and deliberate. He thought about the bracelet currently on his wrist, the one with the knot her mother had tied. He thought about a woman named Christine who had worked 2 jobs and filed emergency contact paperwork and put a name on a form at a school, trying to protect her daughter from a future she hoped would never come. He thought about how love works, sometimes how it travels through documents and braided leather and the names we put on forms and the knots we tie before we're gone, trying to make something hold. He put the bracelet on. Lily watched him do it. She watched him put both of them on, the one from the station and the new one side by side on his wrist. She looked at them and something in her face went quiet in a good way, the way a room goes quiet when something that has been unresolved is finally resolved. "Does it fit?" she said. "Perfect," he said. She looked up at him. "I told Dr. Evers about you," she said, "about this morning on the road. She said it was a significant event." She paused. "I told her it was the most scared I've ever been and also the most safe I've ever felt at the same time." She looked at him steadily. "She said that's possible, that sometimes those 2 things happen together." "She's right," Bear said. "She said the people who show up when you're most scared, those are the ones worth keeping," Lily said. She said it with the particular precision of someone who has thought about a sentence for 3 weeks and finally found the moment to say it. "So," she looked at all of them, "I'm keeping you." Nobody said anything for a moment. The afternoon held still. Then Ruckus laughed, not the way he usually laughed, not quick and defensive, but something lower and realer, and it broke the moment, opened the right way, the way laughter sometimes does, and Diesel was grinning, and even Patch had something around his eyes that wasn't his usual expression, and Ruth on the porch was looking at the sky with her arms crossed and her jaw set, performing great interest in the trees. Bear looked at Lily. "Likewise," he said, and she smiled fully, completely, with her whole face, and it was the first time any of them had seen her do it. They had seen her frightened and determined and exhausted and steady and heartbroken and brave. They had not yet seen her smile. It turned out her smile was something worth seeing. It turned out it was the thing the whole day had been moving toward. They stayed for 2 hours. They sat on Ruth's porch and Lily asked them questions, real questions about where they'd ridden, about the bikes, about how Bear got the name Bear, which turned out to be a story that made her laugh twice, and they answered her honestly, and she listened the way she did everything completely without pretense, with the full weight of her attention. Ruth brought out food at some point, and nobody refused it. When they left, Lily stood on the porch and watched them go. She watched until the sound of the engines faded down the road, and the road was quiet again. Ruth stood beside her. "They'll come back," Ruth said. "I know," Lily said. She said it the way Bear always said it, not hoping, not wishing, knowing. They said they would. She went inside, the door closed. The road was empty, and the afternoon was going golden at the edges, and somewhere 12 miles north, 6 men on 6 motorcycles were riding back through it, carrying bracelets on their wrists, and a day they would never put down. 6 men who had set out for 2 hours of quiet and found something they hadn't known they were looking for. 6 men who had stopped on an empty road when a small voice came out of the trees. 6 men who the world had spent years calling dangerous, calling outlaws, calling things that meant stay away and don't trust and look out, and who had spent one Saturday in October being without apology and without performance exactly what a 10-year-old girl needed them to be. Not heroes in the way stories usually make heroes, not clean or simple or uncomplicated, just present, just willing, just stopped on the road when it mattered. That was enough. That had always been enough. And for Lily, who had run toward them when every reasonable instinct said run away, who had grabbed a stranger's jacket with both hands and asked him not to let her go for Lily, it was everything. She had chosen right on that road, and they had not let her down. And that when everything else about this day had been accounted for and filed and processed and eventually slowly healed, that was the thing that lasted.